Now we're ready. Friends, welcome to Community Church. Welcome on Zoom and welcome on YouTube, and welcome all of you who are here in the room with us in Copley Square. This is an event that we have promised to hold every single August, especially after the passing of Bob Datilio, whose life was about the Sacco and Vanzetti case. Bob passed 3 years ago, and we inherited an enormous archive of Bob's study materials and also just primary source materials from the case. And we proudly have them here on the 3rd floor, and they will soon go to the Boston Public Library. This is a time to just tell you real quickly about our connection to Sacco and Vanzetti. We were founded in 1920, and you will find in our archives on the 5th floor that the very first event that's listed in our record of events is a Sacco and Vanzetti fundraising supper for the Defense Committee. And it went from there. It involved a struggle to have a plaque put in a public place. The plaque, one of the copies of the plaque is now on our wall. We'll show you that plaque, and I'll tell you also that one of our founding mothers, her name was Mrs. Gertrude Winslow, became friends with Vanzetti, visited him numerous times in Charlestown at the jail where they were, gave him English lessons. And in 1927, when they were executed, she was in Italy visiting Vanzetti's family. We also give out an annual Sacco and Vanzetti Award to exemplary activists over the years. We have a list of the Sacco and Vanzetti winners on the wall. That's just a little outline of our DNA that has one strand of Sacco and Vanzetti in it. And so we revere them as our almost martyrs, martyr hero, patron saints in a way, if you want to go in a religious way. But we welcome you. My name is Dean Stevens. I'm the administrator of the church, and I have with me Sue Kranz here, and we're going to sing you a alternative national anthem. That's how we would call it. It's called Arise.
Your sound has been cut off. We can't hear you.
Atlantic and Pacific flow, the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. That's right, the Gulf of Mexico, the land between, sustains us all. To cherish her is our fervent call. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire, and lift our voices from the fire.
The guitar is completely inaudible.
We reach these shores from distant lands. We came with hungry hearts and hands. Some came by force, some by will, through the auction block and the darkened mill. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire, and lift our voices from the fire. We died in your fields and your factories, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees, an old coat hanger in a room somewhere, a trail of tears, an electric chair. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire and lift our voices from the fire. Ooh. Our great responsibility to be guardians of our liberty, till tyrants bend to the people's dreams and justice flows like a mighty stream. Arise, arise, I see the future in your eyes. To a more perfect union we aspire and lift our voices from the fire. We lift our voices from the fire. Thank you, Sue. That's Sue Crans, folks. The song is written by the wonderful Jean Rowe, R-O-H-E. Find a beautiful orchestral version of that song online if you like. We have several just wonderful presenters today, and we're going to start, I believe, with Jessica Femiani. No, I'm sorry. Michele Fazio. Good friend of ours and really long time interested in our collection of Bob's material. She was a good friend of Bob's as well. And Jerry Kaplan has been able to take Bob's collection that was stuffed in two homes that he owned, a two-family apartment in Medford, and lay them out and organize them so beautifully that that the Boston Public Library has snapped them up, which was Bob's original desire anyway. And it's an incredible resource for scholars, which is what Michele is, and she saw this collection of items and was just wonderstruck, and just both with the collection as well with what Jerry has done to it. So from North Carolina, I just want to welcome Michele Fazio to join us, and she will introduce also our next poet presenter. Hi, Michele.
Hi, Dean. It's so good to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen. I think I need permission to share my screen, please. Thank you. Okay, so hello, everyone. Hopefully you all can see my slideshow. If I could just, can everyone see it? I just want to make sure.
Oh, it's still loading.
Okay, I'll try it this way. Sorry about that. One sec.
Michele, we see you occasionally, but we have to see you on the screen too.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm just going to show it like this. So before I introduce one of tonight's speakers, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the creation of the new archive that Dean was just talking about on Sacco and Vanzetti and Italian American anarchism, the Robert DiTilio Special Collections. As many of those gathered here know, Bob was one of the founding members of the Sacco and Vanzetti Commemoration Society, and he devoted his entire life to researching the case. He presented over 50 talks in Boston, New York, and Italy, produced and narrated footage of the funeral procession of Sacco and Vanzetti, organized the plaque outside of the Sacco and Vanzetti Defense Committee headquarters on Hanover Street in Boston's North End, served as the editor of Black Rose, a Boston-based anarchist journal, co-edited an English translation of a set of essays by the militant anarchist Luigi Galliani titled The End of Anarchism, and these are just a few of his accomplishments. My conversations with Bob over the years alluded to his obsession with exploring every detail, avenue, and person associated with the case, tracking down leads and descendants of anarchists to collect whatever he could find. Occasionally, he'd let me into his world by sharing a document with me by email, like the time he sent me the only color image of the Borglum plaque. To this day, no one knows exactly how he acquired that image, but Bob somehow had, and he never revealed his sources. For those of us who knew him well, his stubbornness at times was part of his charm. He was, as many here can recall, quite a character. It wasn't until his passing in late 2020 that the reality of what Bob had amassed over the years began to take hold. Led by Dean Stevens, a close group of friends worked together to ensure that Bob's materials on Sacco and Vanzetti were brought to the community church for safekeeping. Nearly 4 years later, and as a result of the incredible work of Jerry Kaplan, we now know the immensity of Bob's archives. Jerry sorted through a formidable amount of boxes, creating a meticulously cataloged archive and finding aid of Bob's collection on Italian and Italian American anarchist history. Materials that have not yet been published and are not currently available in any other repository. I had several opportunities to see Jerry in action, and I documented his process of cataloging hundreds of books, files, pamphlets, periodicals, original letters, newspapers, flyers, and posters from 1920 to 1928. Jerry, we cannot thank you enough for your incredible work archiving Bob's research. I've had the privilege of watching you work in person, and I've learned so much about Bob and the trial along the way. We owe you a debt of gratitude for your commitment to the study of anarchism and the Sacco and Vanzetti case. You can see here that there's a lot of material that Jerry has culled through. And like Dean said, this is now heading over to the Boston Public Library. It'll take a little bit of time for them to process, but I'm confident that probably late spring, early summer is when we'll have access to these materials. So it's very exciting. But I also would like to acknowledge the efforts of Dean, who worked closely with Bob's family to coordinate the transport of Bob's archives. It was a colossal collective undertaking, and you both understood from the onset how important it was to ensure its preservation. So for those of you not in Boston, I thought I'd show a few of Jerry's discoveries, since we won't yet see this material for a little bit. He found over 30 original letters written by Fred Moore to his wife Lola. Somehow Bob had discovered her whereabouts, and Jerry said he acquired the letter. So this is a fascinating example of his process of doing research and doing it old school. This is before the internet, right? So he was looking in phone books and got, who knows what else to find these people. He located approximately 137 original letters and postcards written in Italian by Luigi Galliani to his daughter and other radicals while he was in prison. And this is arguably the largest source of Galliani's letters in the world. Jerry opened the book for me, and I saw how beautiful his handwriting was. And it was really something to see these in person. And I know other scholars are geeking out over the potential to be able to see these archives. Of course, Bob had his own copy of La Salute and Boy, and perhaps the most surprising of all, a clear plastic bag containing a piece of the electric chair that killed Sacco and Vanzetti. Somehow, Bob acquired these materials. So this new archive, the Robert Bob DiTilio collection, as Dina said, is now being moved over to the BPL to be processed. And it's incredibly fitting that this collection is going to be housed alongside the Aldino Felicani collection, one of the largest Sacco and Vanzetti repositories in the world. I can say confidently that there are scholars all over the globe who are looking forward to accessing these materials. So I just wanted to take whatever time I had today to acknowledge Bob's lifelong commitment, and more importantly, to thank Dean and Jerry for leading us, for documenting, for safeguarding all of this material, and Jerry especially for the painstaking work that you have done to catalog everything. It's an archivist's dream that they're inheriting this from you. You've done so much of the work for them. And I'm just really grateful to the both of you for your efforts. So thank you so much. I also want to say here that this archive is probably the last new archive on Sacco and Vanzetti. And it's really, really important, I think, that we have this resource now, and it's undoubtedly going to shape future scholarship for years to come. So thank you, Jerry and Dean, for all that you've done. And I can't wait to be able to officially see these documents and use them in my work. So each year, as Dina said, the church's annual event features a writer whose work connects to the memory of Sacco and Vanzetti. In past years, I've introduced the work of Catherine Marenghi and Joseph Tora, whose novels explore the history of labor radicalism and add to the growing number of writers commemorating Sacco and Vanzetti and their work. This year's speaker is no different. Jessica Femiani received her PhD in English at SUNY Binghamton, and teaches creative writing and composition at SUNY Oneonta. Her poems and essays have been published in a number of journals, including Labor, Studies in Working Class History, Anch'io, Harbor Palette, Free State Review, and the Italian American Review. In 2024, Finishing Line Press published The American Gun, a stunning book-length poem about gun violence and mass shootings in the US. Jessica and I are both active in the field of Italian American studies. We talk a lot about poetry, teaching, social justice, and our grandparents, individuals who were alive at the time of the trial and understood the significance of the case as a cautionary tale for Italian immigrants struggling to survive. As granddaughters, we examine the power of memory and storytelling in both our family history and in the study of Italian American writers to recognize how ethnicity, class, labor, and gender intersect in real life and in fiction. The two poems she'll be reading for us tonight tackle the politics of identity and the political landscape of the US, challenging us to consider what it means to be Italian American and more generally, how to make sense of the American dream. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Jessica Femiani.
Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm so grateful to Dean and Jerry and the entire community at the Church of Boston, Community Church of Boston. And I want to thank my dear friend Michelle for that really lovely and moving introduction. So I have two poems to read. The first poem is called Something Happened to Me. This poem I wrote in response to reading Jimmy Santiago Baca's poem, 13 Mexicans. That poem is in 34 parts, and part 14 is where I was inspired to write this. The only thing you really need to know about this is that it really transverses like my memories of working as a middle school teacher at I-61 in Corona, Queens, as well as I worked as a case manager, outreach worker at a drop-in center for homeless youth in New York City. So both these experiences will come into this poem. So this poem, Something Happened to Me, is in 7 parts. All right. 1. In the photo albums that my mom keeps on the bookshelf, you can see me at 3, following my father to tackle the snowy driveway. My green sandbox shovel flies flimsy in mittened hands. A stuffed sausage I am, woolen hat pulled down, my scarf tied so tight about my face, so plump in my snowsuit, I could hardly walk about. In the brutal cold of winter days, I can still see you, Kevin, barreling into the classroom, almost ready to fall over. The bright blue of your New York Mets woolen hat is pulled down, almost covering your eyes, and your scarf tightly swathes your face. Your puffy jacket snapped, ready to pop until you hang it in the closet, unveiling the thick of your Sherpa-lined denim jacket. I will never forget you, Kevin, hyperventilating outside of my classroom. The dean interrogating you, Jose, Jesus, and Oscar. It was how she liked to play Law and Order, grilling sixth graders as if $1 disappeared during gym was grand theft. The investigation ends and you return temporarily to the classroom, and I watch as you sit at your desk as your breath begins to slow down. But I can see the frenetic frenzy of fear unfolding in your dark brown almond eyes. What will happen now that you've been misunderstood? So this is part 2. I've read the journal entries of all the places you've lived, all the apartments you traipsed between, your families carrying all your belongings in plastic bags. My memories of then are all angled shots of green tiled hallways. And while I can't remember your name or your face, I can still hear your words as you tell me that you laid a slice of pizza next to your bed and awoke at midnight to a rat biting your slice. I knew there was nothing I could say, nothing I could do, that listening is the gift. But how could I have possibly understood, having grown up in a home where I could have eaten off the floor? Long after the grandparents are gone, I will learn the story of my mother's family, that this family of 6 living in a 1-bedroom off of 187th Street in the Bronx, that this family moved to a house in the country that was once the Bronx. There were mice, yes, so many mice in the house in the Bronx, crawling everywhere, out of the cabinets, along the woodwork. My grandpa fumigates the house, borrows the neighbor's cats, and now something inside me allows me to recognize how utter cruelty masks as confidence. That were 3 of us, cuddling our pet hamsters in sweatshirt pockets, laughing at the grandmothers, their faces contorting, their bodies jerked. This is part 3. We sit at Aunt Mary Ellen's dining room table. It's Christmas. I become the courtroom stenographer. I scribble it all down, learning that at 9 you had to clean the principal's office, then polish the science labs for that bitch of a nun, Sister Mary Margaret, insisting you buff the black soapstone tables with pledge lemon oil. Something happens to me as I learn to take stock of the past and thought more about those stories that keep us tight-lipped, those stories that live within us, even if we don't know. Only if I ask my mother will she tell me that at the mere mention of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, that my grandfather's thin lips pursed tight. My mom tells me the term greasers didn't help, that it threw the women into overdrive, washing the windows, scrubbing the floors, and children's scalps burning red. Something happened to me as I delved into the insidiousness of shame, what goads families to let go of their ways of being for the similitude, the hollow empty that is America's undertow, social hierarchies of skin. How hard my forebears worked to sanitize their lives, but believe they did. They believed in the dream And it is the dream that gets you to believe your children will be safe if you move to the suburbs, that your children will appreciate having all that you did not. 5. When the school day let out at I-61 in Corona, Queens, the teachers would hop in cars heading back to Long Island. I'd walk to the subway, passing kids walking home in drizzles, others congregating in hordes, getting ready to throw down, flinging backpacks, jackets to the ground. Something began to shift within me when it sunk in that the whole school, all 2,500 students of IS-61, left all at once, that these children, black and brown, their lives didn't hum to the rhythm of after-school sports. How can I not forget or get caught up in all that worry of suburban facades, the looming threats each year of budget cuts? Not once, I tell you, did New York State ever take away our after-school sports, our extracurriculars. 6. At the party, I made the mistake of attending. An old college friend told me I should go to social work school because it was cooler. Maybe I chose teaching as it offered a fast track to my very own one bedroom without 3 roommates and their significant others. In 9th grade, I remember hopping the bus to see Natalie Merchant and her 10,000 Maniacs at the Paramount Theater in New York City. Marion, I can still see you in the bright white light of your kitchen's Formica counters, your side part, the wave of your hair as it flips to the side, the blank flat of your stare as it spun off the top of my head, the condescension in your voice as you articulated, "Your mother will never let you go." I don't remember how my mother found out, but I'll never forget the crack of her voice as she yelled, "I trusted you," smacking whiplash across my face. 7. In those last few months at the drop-in center, I knew something was happening, even though I couldn't articulate it. It was something about your face, Christina, how it grew into elegance, the baby fat dissolving, you looking slimmer than you already were. I didn't say anything. I had gotten the rhetoric of lost weight my entire life. But that day I got the call in my office. Ruthie said you were waiting in Bertha's, that you'd been in the bathroom at the Port Authority, that you had wrapped it in brown paper. I didn't know what to do. Ruthie told me there was no need to do anything, but to sit with you, get you to the ER, make sure you got a DNC. I remember squeezing your hand, the pale of your skin, your gray-green eyes sullen, watered by the shock of this day. The paramedics were asking so many questions, and I stood there watching as the EMT peels back the damp brown paper. I could see the oversized head, the undersized body tucked into itself. It made me think about all the times I'd overheard my mother tell my father that one of my cousins had miscarried. How I imagined bright yellow pee in a paper cup, nothing purplish, red, blue, red and blue. Okay. So this next poem is much shorter. It's called Standing at the Cutting Edge of the Fascist Takeover of America. As we walk past the house with the 4-foot silver Buddha, seated in the wooden beams of a treehouse, shrouded in lilac branches bursting, my friend Maria tells me, "You can't do that kind of thing in Russia." Her eyes glancing at the "Not My President" bumper sticker slapped on the back of an old tank of a Buick. She told me about the things that I had heard. The people disappear when they say things, like her mother's brother, her uncle Boris, then her uncle Mikhail, just like that. I think about these things as we are in it, no longer on the cusp. Kilmar Albrego Garcia, Mahmoud Khalil, Marcelo Gomez, Senator Padilla, Brad Landers. God bless Zoran Mamdani. These days I ask myself, should I make a quick getaway? The way Gerhard Richter drove himself out of East Berlin, never to see most of his family again. If I think about it, I don't think Maria's thoughts made any sense to me. Maybe then I had thought I'd never have to worry about this. The same way it never really made sense that when a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl named Christina made her way out of the woods and into my childhood backyard, just like a fairy tale, that it was anything but. I learned from my mother that Christina's parents had been refugees in Italy, having escaped the Russian pogroms of the 1980s. I don't know if it was the nightly news with Dan Rather, or if it was just because as a child I could conjure fear out of anything. But after Christina moved in, I began having nightmares of being caught in the woods. The Russian soldiers driving the butt of their rifles into the center of my chest, pinning me to the ground. So thank you so much to the Community Church of Boston, to Jerry and Dean and Michelle for this invitation. I'm looking forward to the rest of the program.
Jessica, thank you for joining us. And thank you, Michelle, for turning us on to Jessica. I'd like to, in introduction of David Rothauser, to show you the plaque, which is has a history unto itself. The sculptor is Gutzon Borglum, who also did an infamous thing known as Mount Rushmore and another infamous thing down on Stone Mountain in Georgia. But this is a beautiful thing that we have on our wall. And as I show it to you, I will read you what it says. I hope that you can see it. It's yes. What I wish more than all in this last hour of agony is that our case and our fate may be understood in their real being and serve as a tremendous lesson to the forces of freedom, so that our suffering and death will not have been in vain. Folks, David Rothauser has been a part of this community for some 50 years and has participated in every single event related to Sacco and Vanzetti that we have done. He is a filmmaker, an educator, and an author, and we have just entered into an agreement with David that we are going to somehow self-publish a beautiful new novel that he has written. It's called The Diary of Sacco and Vanzetti, a historical novel of which there are many. We have quite a complete collection of them up on our third floor Sacco and Vanzetti room. But David also produced a film about Sacco and Vanzetti and acted in that film as Vanzetti. And he will now give us a reading from that novel, The Diary of Sacco and Vanzetti. David, thank you for who you are and for what you have meant to this congregation for so long. David Rothauser.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for all the people who have invited me. And uh, what I'm going to read from is most historians did not include, or if they did include, she was only a footnote in their academic studies of Sacco and Vanzetti. And I'm talking now about Elizabeth Glendower Evans, uh, Auntie B, as she liked to be called. Anyway, she was a wealthy Boston Brahmin living on Beacon Hill, and she took it upon herself to bring a whole group of women from Beacon Hill, the wealthiest of the wealthy, to visit Sacco and Vanzetti in prison and teach them English. They could not have defended themselves without the help of these women. And this is Mrs. Evans, in this particular chapter, has just returned from England. And she says here, back in Boston, my lady friends on Beacon Hill were clamoring to get the vote. Elizabeth, it's our time. We women have been at the beck and call of our men folk far too long. Join us. History is on our side. Well, there's no advantage to having the vote, I said. If women get the vote, then everyone can vote, even domestics and working girls. What advantage does that give me? Well, the suffragists prevail. Stop hiding behind that worn-out veil, Elizabeth. After all, it's the 20th century. Elizabeth, it's our duty to perform, ladies in cities and towns, to support social reform and woman's suffrage in order to save the home. It's a lady's duty to help the factory girl through political work. One day, one of the suffrage leaders called me on the telephone. Mrs. Glendower Evans speaking. We wonder if you would go down to Fall River and speak to the working girls. To whom am I speaking? Mrs. Flynn. First name, I demanded. Elizabeth, she intoned. Is this some sort of game? I wasn't very trusting then. Goodness, Mrs. Evans, we met a few days ago at the suffrage rally. It's Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. Oh, the flaming radical from New York. Besides that, will you go to Fall River do you think I'm going to do that kind of work? I tell you, I'm far too well born. She refused to take my answer as no. It is to speak to the girls at the factories who are not well born and have to work dreadfully long hours and tell them that the vote will be a grand help to them. Won't you go to speak to them? So I said, well, I'll go. I went to Fall River, and as I left the train, there was a woman dressed in a shabby white dress and carrying a big yellow banner. Oh, God, thought I, have I got to be associated with her? Sure enough, she walked right up to me. Is this Mrs. Evans? and together we boarded a trolley car, whereas she unrolled her banner and flouted it from side to side. I thought I should go through the floor. Presently, it was announced from a platform, "Now Mrs. Evans will speak to you." And there was nothing for me to do but speak. What did I say? Well, the woman who had been speaking had made a very good argument, so I took up the thought from her and did the best I could. It appears I made a good speech and was much applauded. I found that I got on very well. In fact, I liked it. I became a great outdoor speaker, really a good one. From that day and for many years, many were the speeches I made. I always beginning with the thought, I haven't died, so I must say something. And I soon went to conventions where I saw and worshiped Jane Addams, who to this day stands in my mind at the head of all living men and women. Well, I don't know if I answered your question, but here I am. And for God's sake, stop calling me Mrs. Evans. Call me Auntie B. The guard came over and politely interrupted. "Excuse me, Mrs. Evans, but visiting time is over for today." Thank you, Parker. You too may call me Auntie B." My second selection is a letter that was written by Sacco to his son, Dante, 5 days before he was executed. The letter, August 18, 1927. My dear son and companion, the other day I ended my hunger strike, and just as soon as I did that, I thought to write to you, but I find that I did not have enough strength to finish it at one time. However, I want to get it down now in any way before they take us again to the death house, because it is my conviction that just as soon as the court refuses a new trial to us, they will take us there. And between Friday and Monday, if nothing happens, they will electrocute us right after midnight on August 22nd. Therefore, here I am, right with you, with love and with open heart, as ever I was yesterday. Remember this, Dante. Pages sticking together. Remember this, Dante. If I stopped hunger strike the other day, it was because there was no more sign of life in me. Because I protested with my hunger strike yesterday, as today I protest for life and not for death. I sacrificed because I wanted to come back to the embrace of your dear little sister Inez and your mother and all the beloved friends and comrades of life and not death. Well, my dear little boy, remember that here I am going to tell you will touch your sensibilities. But don't cry, Dante, because many tears have been wasted, as your mother's have been wasted for 7 years and never did any good. So, son, instead of crying, be strong so as to be able to comfort your mother. And when you want to distract your mother from the discouraging, from the discouraging soulness, I will tell you what I used to do. I took her for a long walk in the country, gathering wildflowers here and there, resting under the shade of trees between the harmony of the vivid stream and the gentle tranquility of the mother nature. And I am sure that she will enjoy this very much. as you surely would be happy for it. But remember always, Dante, in the play of happiness, don't you use all for yourself only, but down yourself just one step at your side and help the weak ones that cry for help. Help the persecuted and the victim, because they are your better friends. They are the comrades that fight and fall, as your father and Bartolo fought and fell yesterday for the conquest of the joy of freedom for all and the poor workers. In this struggle of life, you will find more love, and you will be loved. Therefore, whatever should happen tomorrow, nobody knows. But if they should kill us, you must not forget to look at your friends and comrades with smiling gratitude. I tell you, they are the ones that still hold the last of our hope that today they can still save us from electrocution. It is the struggle and fight between the rich and the poor for safety and freedom, son, which you will understand in the future of your years to come. Much I thought of you when I was lying in the death house, the singing. We can't hear you.
You're muted. David, you're muted. Good. Yes, yes.
I must have muted it myself.
You're back now, David. Thanks.
It would remind me so often of you and your sister Inez, and I wish I could see you every moment. But I feel better that you did not come to the death house. But then, in another way, if you were not so sensitive, it would be very useful to you tomorrow when you could use this horrible memory to hold up to the world the shame of the country in this cruel persecution and unjust death. Yes, Dante, they can crucify our bodies today, as they are doing, but they cannot destroy our ideas that will remain for the youth of the future to come. Dante, when I said 3 human lives buried, I meant to say that with us there is another young man by the name of Celestino Medeiros, who is to be electrocuted at the same time with us. He has been twice before in that horrible death house that should be destroyed with the hammers of real progress. That horrible house that will shame forever the future souls of the citizens of Massachusetts. Dante, I'd say once more, to love and be nearest to your mother and the beloved ones in these sad days. And I am sure that with your brave heart and kind goodness, they will feel less discomfort. And you will also not forget to love me a little, for I do, oh Sonny, thinking so much and so often of you. Love and kisses to your little Inez and mother, your most hearty, affectionate embrace, your father and companion. But I am too weak to go on. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Bravo, David.
That was
Thank you.
beautiful. Beautiful. We're going to just take a quick scan of the posters that are on the wall, and we thank Jerry Kaplan and Crystal Rollins Jackson for putting these together. These all came from Bob's collection. And I just want to scan them. I don't want to go through them. This is the most beautiful quote from Bartolomeo Vanzetti. If you get a chance to go to our YouTube channel and read it, that would be great. This is an interesting one. It's a 1-year anniversary of the horrible events of August 23rd, 1927. And it's a meeting held under the auspices of the Sacco and Vanzetti Memorial Committee, composed of Professor Samuel Eliot Morrison, Dr. Alice Hamilton of the Harvard Medical School, Mrs. Gertrude Winslow, who we've talked about already, whose granddaughter is in our Zoom audience. Hello, Judy Walcott, and Miss Catherine Huntington, Creighton Hill, Gardner Jackson, and the Sacco and Vanzetti Defense Committee. Here's some news items, and I'll just go through them very quickly. I also want to mention, by way of introduction of this wonderful event that we've looked forward to for a long time, I sort of called it informally Sacco and Vanzetti 101 from Judge Agnes. But in preparing for it, I've been reading the book by Paul Avrich, which is called Sacco and Vanzetti, the Anarchist Background. I think that's the title. I don't have it with me, but it's really beautiful description of who these two men were and the background of how it came to happen. I think we're going to order a bunch of the copies of that book just to have here for to promote a really wonderful summary, which we're also going to receive right now from Judge Agnes. Justice Peter Agnes, retired, is a longtime judge in the courts of the Commonwealth on several levels, and I won't go through them. I'll just say that I, as a Spanish interpreter, had the honor of being before Judge Agnes, especially in Essex County, and working with him and before him on several different occasions. And we had Judge Agnes come and speak, do a special presentation to the interpreters on Sacco and Vanzetti. This is in the early 2000s, and Bob was Judge Agnes was a good friend of Bob's, and they were both passionate about the same case. And so it's really a pleasure that we're going to have this as a permanent record on our YouTube channel, which has a section that's all about Sacco and Vanzetti, and this will be a really wonderful introduction to people who don't know about Sacco and Vanzetti, and a lot of people who come in here don't know a thing, young people especially. So we intend to change that. Judge Agnes, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. All right. Nicola Sacco, whose first name actually was Ferdinando, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti were two Italian immigrants who came to the United States from different regions in Italy in 1908. They arrived separately and were unknown to each other. Their families were not impoverished. They were not activists in any sense when they arrived here. They followed paths followed by many other immigrants from Italy. Sacco learned a trade and earned a good living as a shoe edger. He married and had children. Vanzetti remained a bachelor who tried his hand at many jobs, including fish peddling. However, by 1913, before they met, each man had developed a passion beyond work and family: anarchism. Only when the anarchist connection between Sacco and Vanzetti is understood in its full dimension is it possible to understand why justice was derailed at their trial. This was the insight first noted by my good friend, who you've heard about tonight, the late Robert D'Attilio, who was, I believe, the most knowledgeable person on Italian anarchism in the United States and its relationship to the Sacco Vanzetti case. At the outset, I must tell you that the full story of Sacco Vanzetti, including why their ordeal became a worldwide phenomenon between their trial in 1921 and their execution in 1927, why hundreds of thousands of people in major capitals all over the globe stood in protest when they were executed, why hundreds of thousands more lined the streets of Boston from their Langone funeral home in the North End to the Forest Hill Cemetery in Jamaica Plain as the funeral procession passed, and why these two Italian immigrants inspired artists all over the earth to interpret their experience in literature, painting, sculpture, and other forms of artistic expression cannot be told in an evening, cannot be told in a day, or even in a semester-long course of study. And any serious student of this case must also include the extraordinary collection of letters, one of which you heard this evening, the two men wrote and that were first published in 1928. They stand as some of the greatest literature in American history. So tonight I'll focus my attention on the centrality of anarchism to this story and some features of their 1921 trial. My thesis is that Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted of capital murder at a trial in Dedham, Massachusetts in 1921 that was fundamentally unfair, even by the standards of that day. The unfairness included a biased judge, Webster Thayer, who sat on the same court I sat on for 10 years, whose misconduct was egregious, and the presentation of false and misleading evidence by the prosecutor, District Attorney Frederick Katzman. Between 1921 and 1927, the Sacco Vanzetti case was the stuff of front-page newspaper stories around the world. Following their conviction in July 1921, there were multiple motions for a new trial. Each one was denied by Judge Thayer. The case went to our Supreme Judicial Court 3 times. The process in place at the time to correct on appeal errors and abuses at a trial was extremely limited, with the result that the Supreme Judicial Court essentially washed its hands of the case. After going through the motions of conducting an independent review of the case, Governor Allen T. Fuller declined to commute the sentences and thereby cleared the way for Sacco and Vanzetti to be electrocuted. Efforts were made without success to obtain from 3 different justices of the United States Supreme Court a stay of the execution. Sacco and Vanzetti met their fate in the electric chair at the Charlestown State Prison in the early morning hours of August 23, 1927. Fittingly, however, 50 years later, in 1927, another Massachusetts governor, Michael S. Dukakis, issued a proclamation in both English and Italian that acknowledges the injustices perpetrated against Sacco and Vanzetti. So let me begin with the anarchist background of Sacco and Vanzetti. They were followers of the infamous Italian anarchist named Luigi Galliani, who for many years published a newspaper in Lynn, Massachusetts, called Cronaca Sovversiva, Chronicle of Subversion. Cronaca had a worldwide readership and became the leading newspaper of Italian anarchism in the United States. Galliani's brand of anarchism has been described as anarcho-communism. It was an anti-organizational, anti-hierarchical philosophy. It was premised on the view that government inevitably oppressed workers. He favored a society in which there would be no individual or state ownership of property, and where people's needs would be met by the community through voluntary associations and worker councils. But unlike many other socialists, communists, and anarchists, Galliani preached a message of violence. In fiery speeches and in the pages of Cronaca, Galliani, who was a well-educated lawyer, called for the end of capitalism and the overthrow of government by violence. Galliani believed in direct action, which he described as, quote, propaganda of the deed, end quote. Kronecker went so far as to publish a pamphlet, which was a bomb-making manual, entitled Health is in You. Kronecker also took a strong stance against America's involvement in World War I. Galliani's supporters were known as Gallianisti. The available evidence is that Sacco and Vanzetti did not meet until 1917. They were associated with a circle of Gallianisti in East Boston. Shortly thereafter, they heeded Galliani's call and left for Mexico. It is often reported that their departure was to avoid the draft. This was the inference that the prosecutor sought to convey to the jury at their trial. However, neither Sacco nor Vanzetti was eligible to be drafted because they were not citizens and had not begun the naturalization process to become citizens. However, the law did require that they register, and the two men, whose understanding of English was limited, may have believed their registration notice was a draft notice. There is also evidence that Sacco and Vanzetti and other Gallianisti went to Mexico to prepare for a return to Italy for what Galliani believed would be a revolution spreading there from Russia. At least one federal agent believed the trip was undertaken so Sacco and Vanzetti could learn bomb-making skills. Like so many aspects of this case, we do not know for sure why they made this trip. Nonetheless, it was of short duration. Sacco returned to Massachusetts later that year, and Vanzetti followed him the following year. Now, there was a wave of bombings and attempted bombings in the United States between 1916 and 1920. Federal authorities believed that these bombings were inspired by Galliani and carried out by Gallianisti. On New Year's Day, 1916, for example, a suitcase filled with dynamite was discovered in the Massachusetts State House. Had it not been for a defective fuse, it would have exploded with terrible destructive force. The next day, a bomb destroyed a Woburn factory. Later that year, on December 6th, Alfonso Fagotti, a Gallianisti, was arrested and later convicted of stabbing a Boston police officer. The next day, it is believed that Gallianisti exploded a bomb at the Boston Harbor Police Office, which destroyed the station and shattered windows across the street. Bombings linked to the Gallianisti occurred in New York City, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Boston, and Milwaukee in 1917 and 1918. In December 1918, the homes of a prominent business leader, a police superintendent, and a judge in Philadelphia were destroyed by bombs. Galliani himself spoke at a rally in Taunton, Mass. On February 27, 1919. The next night, 4 Gallianisti who had attended the rally were killed when a bomb they attempted to place at the American Woolen Company in nearby Franklin exploded prematurely. In April 1919, 1 year before the robbery and double murder in South Braintree, for which Sacco and Vanzetti were tried and convicted, an effort by Gallianisti to deliver by mail 36 dynamite package bombs to prominent business and government leaders around the country was foiled. And on June 2nd, 1919, Gallianisti attempted to kill another series of government leaders by delivering to their homes 8 large package bombs. Targets included Judge Albert F. Hayden of the Boston Municipal Court and Massachusetts State Representative Leland W. Powers. One of the bombs did significant damage to the home of Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer in Washington, D.C. However, this bomb ignited prematurely as the bomber approached his front porch. Palmer and his family survived. The bomber, who was obliterated in the blast, is believed to have been Carlo Valdinocci, who was a prominent Gallianisti, an editor of Kronecker, and someone who was with Sacco and Vanzetti in Mexico. Another anarchist from the Boston area was closely associated with Sacco and Vanzetti and traveled with them to Mexico. He was Mario Mike Buda, sometimes referred to as Mike Boda. A note about Mike Buda, who had a career after the Sacco Vanzetti case as a secret operative for Italy's fascist government during World War II, is this. On September 16, 1920, after Sacco and Vanzetti had been arrested, there was a bomb explosion in New York City that has come to be known as the Wall Street bombing. Shortly after noontime, a horse-drawn wagon passed lunchtime crowds on Wall Street and was parked across the street from the J.P. Morgan Bank headquarters. Moments later, a timer set detonation of 100 pounds of dynamite and 500 pounds of cast iron sash weights killed 38 people, seriously injured another 143 people, and injured hundreds more. Despite an intense nationwide investigation, the crime was never solved, though state and federal investigators believed it was most likely the work of Gallianisti. The late Professor Paul Avrish of Queens College in New York, who was mentioned earlier by Dean, a Russian historian and an authority on anarchism during this period, and others have opined in books and articles that Mike Buda was the most likely person who planted the bomb that was known as the Wall Street bombing as an act of revenge for the arrest of Sacco and Vanzetti. However, in the words of Robert Datilio, although Sacco and Vanzetti were not widely known to law enforcement authorities in Massachusetts, federal authorities were aware that they had been extensively involved in labor strikes, political agitation, and anti-war propaganda. Federal authorities also were aware that Sacco and Vanzetti had a close association with Gallianisti, who were believed to be involved in planning or carrying out bombings, as I said. Professor Paul Average, once again, and Francis Russell, who wrote 2 books on the Sacco-Vanzetti case, one proclaiming that they had been railroaded and one concluding that they had indeed committed the crimes for which they were convicted and executed, went further, and on the basis of conversations with anarchists who knew the 2 men, Avrish and Russell, implicate Sacco and Vanzetti in the Galliani-inspired bombing campaign carried out between 1917 and 1920. Wherever the truth may lie about the involvement of Sacco and Vanzetti in the bombings during those years, federal authorities knew that they were associated with Mike Buda and Carlo Valdinocci and regarded Sacco and Vanzetti as dangerous to the security of the United States long before the 1920 South Braintree crime. By the fall of 1920, Valdinocci was dead and Buda had disappeared. Did federal authorities communicate their views about Sacco and Vanzetti to Massachusetts authorities, including Governor Fuller, before, during, or after the court case? If so, did that influence the conduct of Massachusetts authorities? These are intriguing but unanswered questions. The June 2nd, 1919 bomb attack at Attorney General Palmer's home in Washington sparked a nationwide investigation of radicals and a manhunt for Gallianisti in 30 cities and towns in 33 states. A new intelligence division within the Department of Investigations, later to become the Department of Justice, was formed to carry out the effort. Appointed to head it was a young lawyer named J. Edgar Hoover. The result was the Palmer raids, or if you will, the Red Scare. Between November 1919 and January 1920, nearly 10,000 people were arrested. More than 3,500 people were held in detention, and more than 500 resident aliens were deported, including Galliani. There was widespread use of physical brutality by federal agents and unlawful detention practices, which is documented in a comprehensive report by the then newly established American Civil Liberties Union. Bear in mind now that the South Braintree crime took place on April 15th, 1920. In the midst of this bombing and campaign and the Palmer raids. Meanwhile, the investigation of the attack against Palmer's home, including leaflets found in the wreckage, led federal authorities, to two printers of an anarchist journal, Roberto Elia and Andrea Salcedo, both of whom were closely linked to Galliani and to Cronica. They were arrested in New York at the end of February 1920. They were held incommunicado by federal authorities in the Park Row office building in Manhattan. There is evidence that on April 25th, 1920, merely a short 10 days after the South Braintree crimes, Sacco and Vanzetti and their East Boston Gallianisti comrades met to discuss the arrests of Elia and Salcedo. Vanzetti was tasked with traveling to New York City to find out what was happening to Elia and Salcedo. He could not get any information about the two detained printers. He did go to New York, by the way, and he did meet with Carlo Tresca, a prominent non-Gallianisti anarchist, who informed him that there would be more federal raids, and as Robert Titilio has written, it would be wise to get rid of any radical literature and materials that were in their possession. As we will see, some of this actually was brought out by the defense at the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. There is evidence that Vanzetti returned to Boston and met with East Boston Gallianisti comrades on May 2nd, 1920. There is also evidence that Sacco, Vanzetti, and a third member of their East Boston group, Riccardo Ossiani, agreed to meet Mike Buda, who had access to an automobile, the following week to gather the materials that might be found by federal authorities in another round of Palmer raids. Vanzetti also told his comrades that he was scheduled to speak at a fundraiser for Elia and Salcedo that would be held in Brockton on May 9th. Indeed, Vanzetti was carrying a flyer about this fundraiser when he was arrested by state authorities. The following day, May 3rd, 2020, only a few weeks now after the South Braintree crime, Andrea Salcedo fell to his death from a window on the 14th floor of the Manhattan office building where he was being held in federal custody. Federal authorities called it a suicide, brought on by his depression after confessing to printing the leaflets that were found at the scene of the bombing of Attorney General Palmer's home. The Gallianisti claimed Salcedo had been pushed out the window during a brutal interrogation. In any case, the following day, May 4, 1920, there was a front page story in the Boston Herald newspaper. The article asserted that Salcedo and Elia were cooperating with federal authorities in their efforts to round up the remaining Gallianisti who were involved in the bombing campaigns, especially in the bombing of Attorney General Palmer's home. My friend Robert Titilio has used the word materials to describe what Carlo Tresca told Vanzetti to tell his comrades in East Boston to collect once he returned to Boston. I think Bob chose his words carefully. While materials could mean anarchist literature or bomb manuals, which were unlawful to possess, by the way, it is possible that Salcedo's death and the Boston Herald newspaper made it urgent for the East Boston Gallianisti to collect hidden bomb-making material before it was found by federal authorities. This is another of the many unanswered questions. The important point, however, is that whatever may be learned in the future about the anarchist activities of Sacco and Vanzetti prior to or following the South Braintree crime of April 15th, 1920, is separate and distinct from the proof that they committed that crime. Unfortunately, as I will explain, the anarchist activities of Sacco and Vanzetti and the evidence of their involvement in the South Braintree crime were joined together in a toxic brew at their trial to bolster the state's case. So how did Sacco and Vanzetti get connected to the South Braintree crime? The day following the May 4th Herald story, Sacco and Vanzetti were arrested at 10 p.m. as they rode on a West Bridgewater Line streetcar, pulling into the Brockton, Massachusetts station. Each of them was armed. Sacco had a fully loaded .32 caliber Colt automatic handgun. 1 round was chambered, 8 were in the clip, along with 23 .32 caliber cartridges of assorted makes. Vanzetti carried a loaded .32 caliber Harrington and Richardson revolver, a non-automatic weapon, along with 4 shotgun shells. The arresting officer who testified at the trial said that Sacco made a movement as if he was reaching for his weapon, though there is no mention of this in his police report. Sacco and Vanzetti were not told why they were arrested or that they were suspected in a robbery and murder on the night of their arrest or in the day following when they were interviewed by District Attorney Katzman. The initial questioning of Sacco and Vanzetti following their arrest focused entirely on their beliefs, their activities, and their friends. Sacco and Vanzetti lied to the state authorities. They denied knowing Buddha and other anarchists. They lied about why they were on the streetcar. Initially, they were held on firearm charges. They were not charged with the South Braintree crime until September. Here I need to underscore an important fact. Although federal authorities were aware that Sacco and Vanzetti were Gallianisti before the South Braintree crime, the Sacco and Vanzetti defense team did not become aware that their clients were persons of interest to federal authorities until the afternoon of August 22nd, 1927, only hours before the 2 men were executed. Until then, federal authorities falsely denied that there was anything in their files about the 2 men. Whether state authorities were aware of what the federal authorities knew or suspected about Sacco and Vanzetti is unknown. Had this knowledge been available to the Sacco-Vanzetti defense team at trial, it would have been significant because it would have bolstered the defendant's claim that they had lied to the police when they were arrested out of fear of ensnaring themselves and their comrades into the ongoing investigations of anarchist activities. So why were they arrested on May 4th, 1920? What connected the 2 radical anarchists, what connected Sacco and Vanzetti to the holdup and murder of 2 men outside a South Braintree shoe factory? Well, curiously, you won't find it in the voluminous evidence that was presented at trial. The best description of what connected them to the crime that they were ultimately convicted of was supplied by Tom O'Connor, a former State House News Service reporter in Massachusetts, who became deeply involved in the case as an advocate for Sacco and Vanzetti. In his words, Sacco and Vanzetti were connected to the robbery and murder on the basis of, and I quote, an hallucination, end quote, by West Bridgewater Police Chief Michael Stewart. Now, to understand this, we need some more facts about the South Braintree crime. A concise statement of what happened was supplied by Robert DiTilio, and it mirrors the evidence at trial. And I quote, at 3 p.m. on April 15th, 1920, a paymaster and his guard were carrying a factory payroll of $16,776 through the main street of South Braintree, Massachusetts, a small industrial town south of Boston. 2 men standing by a fence suddenly pulled out guns and fired on them. The gunmen snatched up the cash boxes dropped by the mortally wounded pair and jumped into a waiting automobile. The bandit gang, numbering 4 or 5 in all, sped away, eluding their pursuers. End quote. The car used in the robbery was a dark-colored Buick, which was found in a wooded area of West Bridgewater on April 17th, 1920, 2 days after the crime. Tire marks suggested that the bandits abandoned that car and continued their flight in a smaller second vehicle. The location of the Buick was only 2 miles from the home of one Federico Coachi, a known anarchist who had been arrested by Chief Stewart 2 years earlier for immigration violations. Coachi was scheduled to be deported on the very day of the South Braintree crime, April 15th, 1920. But he didn't report because he told authorities his wife was ill. Chief Stewart was asked by federal immigration officials to check on Coachi's status. Coachi was found to be at home, and his wife did not appear to be ill. He packed a suitcase and seemed to Stewart and his men anxious to leave. Police and federal agents brought him to the immigration station. He was deported to Italy 2 days later. Incidentally, the payroll money stolen in the South Braintree crime was never recovered. Chief Michael Stewart told a gathering of law enforcement officers who were viewing the Buick on April 17th, still trying to understand what had happened, that he believed the men who committed the crime, quote, knew no God, end quote, and, quote, anarchists fit this bill, end quote. Chief Stewart decided Coachi must have been one of the bandits because he was an anarchist, and he lived only several miles away from where the Buick was found. Chief Stewart returned to Coachi's home on April 20th following his deportation. There he found Mike Buddha, who told him he was a boarder in Coachi's home and that he owned an old overland automobile, a vehicle smaller than a Buick, that had been towed to a local West Bridgewater garage on April 19th. At this point, Chief Stewart assumed Buddha must therefore have been in league with Coachi. Chief Stewart had no knowledge of Sacco and Vanzetti. Nevertheless, he formed a theory, the hallucination, according to Tom O'Connor, that because the South Braintree crime must have been the work of Italian anarchists, including Coachi and Buddha, whoever came to the local garage to pick up that overland auto was involved in an anarchist conspiracy and in the South Braintree robbery and murder. Chief Stewart also assumed that because Coachi seemed anxious to be deported, he must have taken the money from the holdup with him back to Italy. He alerted the district attorney, who followed up on this hunch by asking federal authorities to check if there was any evidence that Coachi had any cash on him or in his luggage when he left for Italy. The answer that came back was no, but this fact was never disclosed to the defense. Now remember, the plan formulated in East Boston by the Gallianisti in the wake of the death of Salcedo and the Boston Herald story, the plan was that Orsiani, Sacco, Vanzetti, and Buddha were going to meet, and using Buddha's auto, would pick up Gallianisti material, anarchist literature, bomb materials, we don't know. The four men did meet on the evening of May 4th, 1920, at the Elm Street garage in West Bridgewater, where Buddha's car was being held for repairs. At Chief Stewart's request, based on his hallucination, the family that owned the garage agreed to notify the police whenever anyone called for the auto. When the family delayed in returning the auto to Buddha on May 4th, while someone telephoned the police, the four Gallianisti suspected a trap and left. Orsiani and Buddha left as they had come by motorcycle, while Sacco and Vanzetti boarded a streetcar and headed back to Boston, to Brockton. Chief Stewart described all of this in a detailed interview that appeared in the Boston Sunday Globe on April 10th, 1960. Buddha was never arrested, and nowhere in the record of this case is there any evidence of a connection between Mike Buddha and the South Braintree crime, except in the mind of Chief Stewart. Orsiani was arrested for the South Braintree crime on May 6th and was found to be carrying a firearm. He, like Sacco and Vanzetti, lied about his activities and his associates. The same eyewitnesses who identified Sacco and Vanzetti as participants in the South Braintree crime also identified Orsiani as a participant. However, Orsiani was released from custody on May 12th because he had an ironclad alibi for April 15th. He was at work. As a result, although Chief Stewart believes Coachi Orsiani, Buda, Sacco, and Vanzetti were the perpetrators of the South Braintree robbery and murder, only Sacco and Vanzetti were put on trial. Now, time constraints require that I pass over some aspects of this complex story, and I'll condense it even further by saying that there was an earlier crime in December of 1919 that amounted to a botched attempted robbery of a vehicle carrying a payroll. Because of Chief Stewart's belief in the involvement of Italian anarchists in the South Braintree crime, Vanzetti and Sacco were believed to have been involved in this earlier crime. However, Sacco had an airtight alibi himself. So Vanzetti was tried alone, and he was convicted. Despite a plethora of alibi witnesses, Vanzetti did not take the stand. And his alibi witnesses, who were Italian speaking and who spoke poor English, did not make a good impression on the jury, according to observers. But whatever else may be said about that case, the Pinkerton Detective Agency conducted its own investigation of this earlier crime because they were hired by the insurance company for the shoe company whose payroll was the subject of the crime. According to the Pinkerton statements of witnesses at the crime scene, the statements contradicted the testimony of these witnesses at trial, but none of this was disclosed to the defense. Judge Thayer happened to be the trial judge. District Attorney Katzman happened to be the prosecutor. Vanzetti was sentenced to 10 to 12 years in state prison. So now we come to the main event, the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti before Judge Webster Thayer and a jury in Dedham, Massachusetts, commencing on May 31st, 1921. High-profile trials like this do not occur in a vacuum. Jurors come to this service with life experiences. The jurors in the Sacco Vanzetti case had to be aware that the defendants were persons the government believed were dangerous. Specially designed bomb-resistant steel shutters and sliding steel doors had been installed in the courthouse, which was surrounded throughout the trial by heavily armed police. Sacco and Vanzetti, in keeping with the custom of the time, sat in a cage at the rear of the courtroom during their trial. The jurors, like other Americans, had lived through years of bombings linked to Italian anarchists, which were described in great detail in the front page of newspapers. This, along with the revolution in Russia, caused many Americans to fear that radicals were about to overthrow the U.S. government. Many Americans believed that radicals, including socialists, Bolsheviks, and anarchists, were also fueling the labor strikes that had become common by this time. Also, remember, the nation had recently gone through a world war. The economy, which had been greatly expanded with low unemployment during the war years, suddenly spiraled into a depression during 1920 to 21. Unemployment soared. With the return of so many soldiers for whom there was not enough work, a view emerged that immigrants and foreigners were taking jobs away from patriotic Americans. In a nutshell, the judge presiding over the trial of two radical Italian anarchists in the spring of 1921 faced a great challenge. The judge had to ensure that anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner, and anti-radical feelings would not overwhelm the jury, and that the defendant's guilt or innocence would not turn on whether the jury believed that they were patriotic Americans. Unfortunately, not only did Judge Webster Thayer not meet this challenge, he engaged in conduct that contributed to the unfairness of the trial. Consider what he said at the very beginning of his final instructions to the jury. He told the jurors, "Although you knew that your service would be arduous, painful, and tiresome, yet you, like the true soldier, responded to that call in the spirit of supreme American loyalty. There is no better word in the English language," he said, "than loyalty. For who is loyal to God, to country, to his state, and to his fellow men, represents the highest and noblest type of American citizenship. These were highly charged words at this 1921 trial because the unpatriotic conduct of the defendants was highlighted and explored at great length during the trial. The defendant's principal attorney was Frederick Moore. He was a well-known socialist and defender of radicals. He decided that the jury had to hear that the defendants were anarchists and fearful of being implicated in the Galliani-inspired anarchist activities in order to explain why they lied to the police when they were arrested. However, District Attorney Katzman exploited this opening and exceeded the bounds of fairness in a way that I believe did grave harm to the defendants. The district attorney questioned Vanzetti about his flight to Mexico when other young men were being drafted for service in the military, and about his political views. Vanzetti withstood this cross-examination reasonably well. Sacco, on the other hand, did not. District Attorney Katzman mocked the sincerity of Sacco's political views, his Italian heritage, and his love for his family and his country, in a blistering cross-examination that extends for 100 pages in the official transcript. And by the way, one of the reasons why this case is capable of being studied so carefully is because there is documentation, not only of the trial, but we have notes of the principal participants in the trial and a plethora of news stories describing the goings-on at the time of the trial. Recall, neither Sacco nor Vanzetti, whose native language was Italian, spoke English very well. Their manner of speaking before the thoroughly Americanized, all-male, all-white Norfolk County jury certainly underscored their status as foreigners and outsiders. So what was the evidence presented? The first major category was called consciousness of guilt evidence. If you lie to the police about your activities when you're arrested, it may indicate you have guilty knowledge. However, such evidence is relevant in a criminal trial only when it suggests guilt relating to the crime charged. That was not established by the district attorney in this case because the defendants were never told why they were arrested. If Sacco and Vanzetti lied to the police because they believed their arrests related to their anarchist activities, including in particular the bombing of Attorney General Palmer's home, the judge should have told the jury that before it could use the evidence of their lies as consciousness of their guilt, it had to find that the lies were told because the defendants were trying to cover up their involvement in the double murder and robbery. Judge Thayer did not explain any of this to the jury, but simply told them they could consider the lies told by Sacco and Vanzetti as evidence of their guilt of the double murder and robbery. Furthermore, even when consciousness of guilt evidence is properly admitted, a judge in 1921, as a judge today, must exclude it if its probative value, that is, its value in helping the jury understand the issues in the case, is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. This is a calculation judges are frequently called on to make. In my opinion, Judge Thayer failed to correctly apply the law by not reining in District Attorney Katzman's acerbic and mocking cross-examination of Sacco. Now, the district attorney failed fundamentally in his duty as well. At the time of this trial, and up to this day, prosecutors, unlike defense attorneys, have a legal and ethical duty to be ministers of justice and not simply advocates for the government. As one respected national standard states, the primary duty of the prosecutor is to seek justice within the bounds of the law, not merely to convict. In a March 1927 article in the Atlantic magazine titled The Case of Sacco and Vanzetti, later to become a book, then professor and later Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter writes, by systematic exploitation of the defendant's alien blood, their imperfect knowledge of English, their unpopular social views, and their opposition to the war, the district attorney invoked against them a riot of political passion and patriotic sentiment. The jury might not remember any of the law contained in the 25 pages of instructions read by Judge Thayer, but they certainly would not mistake the judge's personal opinion about the defendant's politics, end quote. Now, Judge Thayer's bias was on display even before the trial began. In an earlier trial of another anarchist who was indicted for violating the Massachusetts Criminal Anarchy Act, Thayer publicly berated the jury for returning a verdict of not guilty. The account of the case appears in the Boston Herald and indicates that the defendant had merely expressed his political views and had not violated the law. Although there was a complete stenographic record of the Sacco Vanzetti case, in a public trial, not everything that happens in the courtroom is recorded. On several occasions during the trial, Judge Thayer said to reporters, quote, "Just wait till you hear my charge," end quote. And, quote, "You wait till I give my charge to the jury. I'll show them," end quote. And this is an affidavit submitted to the court after the conviction by these reporters. During the trial, Thayer was openly hostile to attorney Fred Moore, remarking to reporters that, quote, "No long-haired anarchist from California can run this court," end quote. Thayer's antipathy towards Fred Moore was compounded by Fred Moore's appearance, long hair, unkempt dress, and his habit of taking off his shoes in the courtroom. Following the trial, but before Thayer acted on any of the motions for a new trial, he had a conversation with Louis Stark of the New York Times, in which Thayer said he saw no difference between a philosophical anarchist and a murderer. Following his denial of the first motion for a new trial in 1924, Judge Thayer had a conversation at a Dartmouth College football game with Dartmouth professor James P. Richardson. Thayer was a Dartmouth grad, which is why he was there. Thayer reportedly said, according to Richardson, quote, "Did you see what I did to those anarchist bastards the other day? I guess that will hold them for a while. Let them go to the Supreme Court and see what they can get out of them," end quote. The improper conduct exhibited by the judge was the subject of a letter written to the Massachusetts Attorney General by Frank Sibley, who covered the trial for the Boston Globe. Other reporters also submitted affidavits to the court and then to the Lowell Commission, formed by Governor Fuller in 1927 to investigate the case. Fuller promised an independent investigation before deciding whether to commute the sentence of death. The Lowell Commission concluded, quote, "From all that has come to us, we are forced to conclude that the judge was indiscreet in conversation with outsiders during the trial. He ought not to have talked about the case off the bench, and doing so was a grave breach of official decorum," end quote. Nevertheless, the Lowell Commission concluded that the defendants had received a fair trial. In my opinion, this was a tragic minimization of egregious judicial misbehavior. There's another peculiar feature of this case that worked against the defendants. This case, coincidentally, was one of the first death penalty cases in Massachusetts to be tried before one judge. Now, today, it's commonplace, as we all know from television and the news, that trials are conducted by a single judge. But from colonial days, all the way up until the time shortly before the Sacco Vanzetti case, capital cases, death penalty cases, were tried before a panel of at least 3 appellate judges or trial judges. This meant that all the pivotal rulings on evidence during the trial and all the challenges raised after the trial were decided by a panel of 3 until the Sacco Vanzetti case, because the case was tried by a single judge, Webster Thayer, who made all the rulings and who also made rulings on his own alleged misconduct after the trial. This is highly significant because the standard of review that was applied when a person appealed in 1921 was very deferential. For example, most of the rulings made at a trial by Judge Thayer and by judges to this day are what we describe in the law as discretionary. That is, they consist of applying the law to facts, and in most cases, there may be more than one correct answer. The term used to describe an improper exercise of discretion by a judge is called abuse of discretion. On appeal at the time of the Sacco and Vanzetti case, to establish an abuse of discretion, the appealing party had to persuade the court, quote, that no conscientious judge acting intelligently could honestly have taken the view expressed by him, end quote. In a 2011 case, the SJC, our Supreme Judicial Court, finally retired this standard, pointing out that it was so deferential that the likelihood of a party demonstrating an abuse of discretion, quote, would be as rare as flying pigs, end quote. When a group of 3 judges preside and confer with each other, it's understandable why an appellate court would defer to their ruling. But when the SJC in this case deferred to a judge whose conduct was rife with misconduct and indicative of extreme bias against the defendants, one is left with the impression that the court simply washed its hands of the matter, leaving Sacco and Vanzetti to appeal to the mercy of Alvin Fuller. Fortunately, the modern Supreme Court has replaced the highly deferential standard described above with a far less deferential standard that applies today. And Massachusetts took another important step after the conviction to address growing unease, not only in the public sphere, but in the legal sphere, about whether a mistake had been made in the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. Normally, up until the time of the case, criminal appeals were limited to questions of law. The appellate court could not look at the facts on the theory that those were decided by the jury and there was no review of what the jury decided. However, in 1939, as a result of agitation in the ranks of lawyers in Massachusetts, and as a result of the Massachusetts Bar Association in particular, the legislature changed our law, and from then on to this day, the Supreme Court is tasked with reviewing the law and the facts in every appeal from a conviction of murder in the first degree, and is authorized to order a new trial or reduce the severity of the conviction if it was satisfied that the verdict was against the law, the weight of the evidence, or for any other reason that justice may require. I'm back to the evidence at trial. 59 witnesses testified for the Commonwealth, 99 for the defendants. Most of these witnesses were eyewitnesses, so-called, or alibi witnesses. The DA claimed, and the evidence showed, a total of 6 shots struck the 2 victims as they walked along Pearl Street carrying 2 cases filled with the pay envelopes for the factory workers. The Commonwealth alleged that there were 2 shooters. One shooter fired a total of 5 rounds from a Savage brand automatic handgun. The DA made it clear to the jury that this shooter was neither Sacco nor Vanzetti. He was never identified. The paymaster, Frederick Parmenter, was struck by 2 bullets from this Savage automatic handgun. The guard, Alessandro Baradelli, was struck by 3 bullets fired from the Savage handgun. That leaves one remaining bullet, what has become the famous bullet number 3, as it was marked by the medical examiner who removed it from Baradelli's body. Bullet number 3 was believed to be the fatal wound suffered by Baradelli, and it was D.A. Katzman's claim at the trial that it was fired from a Colt automatic handgun, and it was the Colt automatic handgun seized from Sacco at the time of his arrest. Baradelli died at the scene. The other victim, Parmenter, died the following day after declaring he didn't recognize his assailants. Thus, and it's important to bear in mind, the Commonwealth never alleged that Vanzetti was one of the shooters, but instead said he was present when the victims were shot, and that he assisted Sacco and the other unknown shooter. Now, eyewitness testimony was the second major category of evidence. We talked about consciousness of guilt. Eyewitness testimony was the second major category of evidence. In brief, it was confusing and contradictory. For example, take witness Mary Splain, who was a principal eyewitness for the Commonwealth. She said she was on the second floor of the shoe factory. She said she ran to the window when she heard shots. She testified that she was certain that Sacco was inside the Buick as it sped away, even though she was 60 to 80 feet away, and her view could not have lasted for more than 1.5 to 3 seconds. As Justice Frankfurter noted in his Atlantic magazine article, quote, "The startling acuity of Splain's vision was, as a matter of fact, the product of a year's reflection. Immediately after Sacco's arrest, the police, in violation of approved methods for the identification of suspects, brought Sacco alone into Splain's presence. Then, followed in about 3 weeks, a preliminary hearing was conducted at which Sacco and Vanzetti were bound over for the grand jury. Justice Frankfurter points out that at this hearing, only 40 days after the crime, Splain was unable to identify Sacco. And at trial, she repeatedly contradicted herself. Also, it should be noted that the DA obtained these identifications by the use of procedures that we call show-ups, in which days after the crime, a group of so-called eyewitnesses would be gathered together to view the suspects, who could be made to assume poses like the alleged perpetrators. Such procedures are not permitted today and were disfavored in 1921. Other eyewitnesses for the Commonwealth who identified Sacco, Devlin, Pelzer, and Andrews, were thoroughly discredited by the defense. Only one eyewitness put Vanzetti at the scene of the crime, a gentleman named Lavangi. He was the gatekeeper at the railroad crossing that the Buick passed by after the robbery. He testified that a, quote, light-haired man, end quote, who he identified as Vanzetti, was driving the Buick. Apart from the fact that Vanzetti was dark-haired, Lavangi's identification testimony had the same quality as Splain's testimony. It seemed to improve with age, because another railroad employee named McCarthy testified that he spoke with Lavangi less than an hour after the crime, and that Lavangi told him, as Lavangi started to put the gate down, somebody inside the vehicle pointed a gun at him, and he ducked down inside the nearby shanty. McCarthy testified that Lavangi said, "All I saw was a gun. I couldn't identify anyone." Justice Frankfurter's article points out that D.A. Katzman went so far as to argue, and this is borne out by the transcript, that even though Lavangi was wrong in saying that Vanzetti was the driver of the Buick, the jury should still consider his testimony as supportive of other evidence that Vanzetti was in the Buick. Vanzetti, on the other hand, presented a compelling case of alibi. As Justice Frankfurter pointed out, quote, 31 eyewitnesses testified positively that no one of the men they saw in the murder car was Vanzetti. 13 witnesses either testified directly that Vanzetti was in Plymouth that day selling fish or furnished corroboration of that testimony. Neither Judge Thayer nor the lawyers thought that the eyewitness identification evidence was a significant factor in the case. And candidly, that is the assessment of most authors who have written about the trial. So consciousness of guilt was one category of evidence, eyewitness identification another category. The third major category and final category was the ballistics evidence. In 1921, the science of ballistics was at its infancy. What was not appreciated at the trial was the significance of the examiner's subjective judgment in saying that there was a match between a bullet or a bullet fragment removed from a victim's body and a specific firearm. At the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti, there were no standards that defined what a match meant. And there were no standards governing the qualifications or the reliability of so-called ballistics experts. In 1921, the comparison microscope that allowed ballistics experts to look at two bullets under a microscope to conduct a side-by-side comparison did not exist. That meant that ballistics experts at that time were required to test fire a firearm, like Sacco's Colt automatic, individually examine the bullets from the test fire, and then individually examine the bullets or fragments removed from the victim's body, and then make observations of the physical characteristics of each bullet one at a time to reach a conclusion whether they had all been fired from the same firearm. Well, let's start with Vanzetti in terms of this ballistics testimony. The DA's theory, as I said, and what he argued to the jury, was that Vanzetti hadn't fired a weapon during the crime. Rather, the DA argued that he was at the scene and he helped Sacco, who had fired the Colt handgun, along with the unknown bandit who had fired the Savage automatic. As proof of this, the DA argued that the Harrington and Richardson revolver found on Vanzetti when he was arrested in the streetcar in Brockton the year before had been taken by Vanzetti from the body of the guard, Alessandro Berardelli, who was known to carry such a weapon, which was not found at the scene. These are DA Katzman's words to the jury. Quote, Vanzetti took the Harrington and Richardson revolver that poor Berardelli tried to draw from his pocket to defend himself, and before he sunk to his knees with the blood coming out of his mouth, dying on the sidewalk that afternoon, end quote. At least one juror, John Dever, reported after the conviction that he was convinced that the Commonwealth had proved that Vanzetti had taken Berardelli's weapon. The problem is it was conclusively established after the trial that Berardelli was not carrying a weapon on the day he was shot because it was in a repair shop. And further, it was established after the trial that District Attorney Katzman was aware of this. The point and more is the subject of an excellent 1985 book titled Post-Mortem, New Evidence in the Case of Sacco and Vanzetti by William Young and David Kaiser. Now, what was the ballistics evidence against Sacco? Well, the chief witness for the Commonwealth was State Police Captain William Proctor. He went to Brockton after the arrest of Sacco and Vanzetti and received from the Brockton police Sacco's automatic handgun. He examined all the bullets that were in the firearms seized from the defendants and that were on their person. He examined the bullets and bullet fragments removed from the bodies of the two victims. And he examined the bullets from the test firings of Sacco's Colt automatic and the firearm that was on Vanzetti's person. Captain Proctor testified that he was confident in saying that 5 of the bullets removed from the two bodies, remember there was a total of 6, 5 of the bullets removed from the two bodies were fired by the unknown assailant from the Savage automatic handgun. He also testified that the 5 bullets test fired from Sacco's pistol had visible markings on them that enabled him to give the opinion that they were fired from Sacco's pistol. When asked about so-called bullet number 3, the bullet that caused Berardelli's death, Captain Proctor testified that based on the visible markings on it, it was a Winchester make, and it was fired by a .32 caliber Colt pistol. He was then asked by Katzman, quote, have you an opinion as to whether bullet 3 was fired from the Colt automatic, which is in evidence, that is, Sacco's Colt automatic? Captain Proctor testified that he had an opinion. When asked for it, Captain Proctor testified, quote, my opinion is that it is consistent with being fired from that pistol. In his closing argument, Katzman left no room for doubt about how the jury should interpret this testimony from Captain Proctor. He told the jury that Proctor's testimony established that, quote, Sacco fired a bullet from a Colt automatic that killed Alessandro Baradelli, end quote. In his instructions to the jury, Judge Thayer told the jury that there was evidence from the district attorney's witnesses, quote, to the effect, end quote, that Sacco's pistol fired the bullet that killed Baradelli. In other words, the jury had evidence from which it could find that fact. The problem with Katzman's argument to the jury is that following the trial, Captain Proctor submitted a sworn affidavit to the court, stating that before the trial, he told Katzman and his assistant, who incidentally later became a justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, that he and the other ballistics expert tried every means possible to form an opinion that Sacco's gun fired the fatal bullet. In his affidavit, Captain Proctor also stated that he told Katzman he could not find evidence to support that theory. He also told the district attorney that if he was asked at trial if Sacco's pistol fired the fatal bullet, he would testify that he could not say. Finally, in his affidavit, Captain Proctor goes beyond this and states that when he said bullet 3 was consistent with having been fired from Sacco's pistol, he did not intend to imply that it had been fired by Sacco's pistol. This controversy was the subject of one of the many motions for a new trial that was denied by Judge Thayer in a lengthy opinion, who found no wrongdoing on the part of the district attorney, despite the evidence that the witness, Captain Proctor, and the DA had prearranged the question that would be asked at trial in order to mislead the jury. Judge Thayer reasoned that the DA's questions were clear and must have been understood by the witness. And he also pointed out that the witness was not lying when he claimed that it was his opinion that Sacco's pistol, that it was consistent, bullet 3 was consistent with having been fired from Sacco's pistol. On appeal, the Supreme Judicial Court upheld Judge Thayer's ruling on the basis that they could not upset discretionary rulings. Now, there's much more that could be said about the evidence in the trial, but time doesn't permit. So let me make 3 brief points in closing to fill out the picture. You've heard the name Celestino Medeiros mentioned tonight. He was an immigrant from the Azores who had a criminal record and was associated with a group of bandits known as the Morelli Gang from Providence, Rhode Island. On November 18, 1925, while the appeal in his own case was pending, he slipped a note to Sacco while both were being held at the Charlestown prison, confessing to the South Braintree shoe company crime, adding, quote, Sacco and Vanzetti was not in said crime, end quote. Many in law enforcement who were involved in the case also believed that the Morelli Gang had committed both the botched robbery in Bridgewater in December 1919 and the South Braintree robbery and double murder in April 1920. The Sacco and Vanzetti Defense Committee developed additional evidence linking Medeiros and the Morelli Gang to the crime, and they filed a motion for a new trial. Again, however, Judge Thayer denied the defendant's motion. In his article in the Atlantic magazine, Justice Frankfurter wrote that Thayer's opinion, quote, cannot accurately be described otherwise than as a farrago of misquotations, misrepresentations, suppressions, and mutilations, end quote. Now, there were also ballistics tests that some of you may be aware of that were conducted after the trial. So let me just mention briefly. The effort was to try to resolve this debate about whether bullet number 3 was fired from Sacco's revolver. One set of tests was done in 1927 by Calvin Goddard, the inventor of the comparison microscope. He concluded that bullet number 3 had been fired from the pistol alleged to have been taken from Sacco. A second round of tests was arranged by Francis Russell in 1961. The result was the same. A third and final set of tests were conducted in 1983 at the request of Westington Broadcast and Cable Incorporated. Not surprisingly, and that test, by the way, concurred with the first two tests. Not surprisingly, there is controversy about the reliability of these tests. Assuming that they are accurate, the question that has not been answered is whether the Colt automatic pistol that was tested is actually the one that was taken from Sacco when he was arrested in 1920. There's no chain of custody involving that pistol. And following the trial, the evidence passed into the hands of law enforcement. And it stayed in the hands of law enforcement all these years. It's to this day believed to be in the custody of the Massachusetts State Police. And the final point is about statements made after the trial that purported to tell the true story of what happened. In 2005, the LA Times reported that a man found a letter dated August 29th, 1929. 1929, yes, 2 years after the execution, in which author Upton Sinclair, who wrote a 2-volume account of the case called Boston, which, by the way, is probably the best single account of the case ever written. Upton Sinclair acknowledged that before the book was published, but after the two men were executed, Fred Moore told him that Sacco and Vanzetti had committed the South Braintree crime. Now, I believe the letter, which is available for you to read on the web, is genuine, but it is simply Sinclair's account of a conversation with Moore, along with background information offering an explanation of why Moore may have said it. He was an embittered man by 1929. He had a severe drug problem, and Sacco and Vanzetti came to despise him and finally fired him as their lawyer in 1924. There are other claims we could discuss in which anarchists reportedly said Sacco was involved but not Vanzetti, but their sources were never disclosed. So in conclusion, next year, July 4th, 2026 will mark the official 250th anniversary of the American Revolution. I hope the commemoration will include careful attention to the words of the Declaration of Independence. That document declares that our American Revolution was undertaken because of the abuses of a tyrannical king, George III, who, among other things, obstructed the administration of justice and made judges dependent on his will alone. These are the words of our Declaration of Independence. We lost our way in 1921 when abuses of power resulted in a death sentence for Sacco and Vanzetti. And we've lost our way at other times over the past 100 years. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that we find ourselves once again at a crossroads. And so the great unanswered question for you tonight, and here I paraphrase what Governor Dukakis wrote in his 1977 proclamation, is whether we are resolved, quote, to prevent the forces of intolerance, fear, and hatred from uniting to overcome rationality, wisdom, and fairness. Thank you.
Bravo, Judge. Bravo.
Thank you. I apologize for being a bit wordy, but.
Dean, may I comment?
Please, not yet. Thank you. We will have a little bit of a Q&A. But I want to just thank Judge Agnes for this really comprehensive and meticulous review of the case. It's kind of what we need to send people to for just a deep background. Also to Paul Avrich's book that's called Sacco and Vanzetti, the Anarchist Background. I also want to thank Judge Agnes for being part of something really important, which is that in the Adams Courthouse, there's a permanent display, exhibition of the Sacco and Vanzetti case. And I think that Judge Agnes had a whole lot to do with it. And it's really an interesting thing that in Massachusetts' highest court, which is the Supreme Judicial Court and the Appeals Court that's housed in that courthouse, there is a permanent display of a case and a really a beautiful example of judicial humility. You know, we really screwed up on that one, is basically what it's saying, and it's maybe a statement of what judicial conduct should be about. You know, that we are fallible human beings, and that things really mess up sometimes. Take January 6th and what happened after that. Anyway, that's my way of saying thank you so much for being with us here. And again, we say that 2027 is fast approaching, and Jerry and I are trying to make community church an instrumental part of a serious commemoration of that 100th year anniversary of the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, and I hope that Judge Agnes will also be involved with that with us in the Boston Public Library, where all these archives are going to go. So we have a little bit of time for a Q&A. I think there are a couple of people online who might want to chime in, and this is your chance. Please be brief, and please ask a question, not make a long statement or bloviation, if you will. Thank you. Who's first?
Am I?
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Leonard.
Thank you. I'm Leonard Lehrman. Judge Agnes, that was a marvelous talk. I just want to add a detail about the Morelli gang that you brought in toward the end. Bob DiTilio was of the belief that they were responsible and tried for years to prove it definitively. He didn't get definitive proof, but the fact that they are probably, almost definitely, responsible for the crime that Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted of was something that Herbert and Sarah Ehrman used to convince Mark Blitzstein when he wrote his opera that I completed on Sacco and Vanzetti, and Michael Dukakis when he issued the exoneration. Those were critical points that the Ehrmans raised. And I think that more people should recognize them. I also want to say that in conjunction with the centennial coming up, we are hoping that there's going to be a production in Boston. I got of the opera, the Blitzstein opera. I got a message a month ago from White Snake Opera Company that they are interested in, and I would urge everybody to encourage them to do that. David Rothauser has seen the opera and testified for it. It was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize after it had finally got an orchestral premiere in 2022 in the Bronx. And the other thing that I want to mention is there's a new book out about Alger Hiss, which is directly related to the Sacco and Vanzetti case in this way. The Jeff Kisilov, who writes about Hiss and Chambers, theorizes rather convincingly, I think, that Whittaker Chambers was a kind of a puppet, and one of the puppet masters was Isaac Don Levine, who was a friend of Emma Goldman and an ardent supporter of Sacco and Vanzetti, who became so estranged and alienated during the conflicts between the communists and the anarchists in the Spanish Civil War and in Sacco and Vanzetti that he turned totally viciously anti-communist, and what you described about the tension between Carl Tresca and Fred Moore, and I mean, Sacco wrote a letter to Fred Moore, firing him, calling him your implacable enemy. I mean, there was tremendous tension there, which is not in the opera actually, but it was in a lot of discussions I had with Bob DiTilio. And this tension is now something that is becoming focused on. Next, on September 17th, there's going to be a meeting at the Tamiment Library about that Hiss book. And I want to mention that that my book has just come out, and I'm hoping that maybe I can say something about it at the Community Church of Boston. Dean, I'm going to be there with my wife for our Harvard reunion in June. it'll be 5 years since we were there last, and we would love to come and talk with you. And we've been performers and supporters of community church for decades now. And this talk that Judge Agnes gave is a highlight. Thank you so much for having it, and thank you so much for giving it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard.
Let me just add one tidbit about the Morelli gang connection. If you had a photo of Mike Morelli, who was one of the gang members, and a photo of Nicola Sacco, you would think they were brothers. They resembled each other.
Judge, that is brought up in Reginald Rose's NBC TV production of Sacco and Vanzetti. He reenacts that scene where where airmen showed the photo of Mike Morelli to a witness, and the witness said, "That's Sacco." That's exactly what you're talking about, and it's in that film, which is very difficult to obtain. Reginald Rose gave it to me, and I shot it, but NBC wanted $75 per frame to show it. There should be a way to get it released. It's definitely worth watching, if among other things, for that scene that you just described.
Thank you, Leonard. Do we have somebody else online with or Charlie? Use this one.
This might not be a fair question, but can you compare the anti-immigrant attitude of that time period with what's going on right now?
Well, I would say this. In 1919, 1920, 1921, there was essentially one outlet for news and information, primarily, and that was newspapers, radio as well, but primarily newspapers. Today, with the internet and the ability to push communications not only inexpensively, but virtually to the entire world at the push of a button, whether they were reliable or not, I think that the technology today makes it easier to whip up public sentiment than it ever was. But it's hard to say, hard to make a direct comparison. But it's obviously there's obviously an anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner, anti-radical sentiment today. But in 1921, remember, people had been reading the news week in and week out about places and people being bombed. And that might have made it even more frightening for people.
Well, it's kind of like the propaganda that comes out of the White House right now about how Salvadorans are all criminals, and they find one horrible case and try to paint an entire population as that kind of people. And I can attest that that's not that kind of people that they are, because I know lots of them with no documents and who work harder than anybody I know, and are, I would say, better Americans than I am, because of their longing for a better life and their being first immigrants, like the Statue of Liberty welcomes, say I. But that's my brief opinion. And we'll have, I just want to tell folks that we have a wonderful series of Sunday programs coming up at Community Church. We start on October 6th with, let me just tell you who they are. Another retired judge. His name is Williams, Greg Williams from the Cape. And he's doing a presentation with musical accompaniment from Jacqueline Schwab, who is Ken Burns's music director on many of those documentaries. And it goes on from there. We focus on the Middle East, and we also focus on the immigration crisis. Our new newsletter will come out in mid-September. Join us. We have a mailing list back there. Be in touch with us through email to have you added to our email list and let you know what's going on. Look at our YouTube channel. We have everything, including this program, documented on the YouTube channel until Google decides to pull it down, which is possible. And many other events. There's tomorrow, on Monday, there's Labor Day events going on in Boston. Look them up and show your face, stand up and be counted. Charlie, you're raising your hand. Tilly Teixeira.
Hi.
Who got
I want to take you to New Jersey and New York, actually, because
I'll go with you, Tilly.
the end
Let's
of the
go.
program tonight mentioned what brought me into movement, which was Boston, the Upton Sinclair book. But close friends of my family, and actually through the whole period, of the 30s into 40s and McCarthy thing, very close friends of the family. They had been involved in New York in for Sacco and Vanzetti. No, they weren't union. No, well, it was political, but they gave fundraisers. They gave a major fundraiser. And I can remember my father discussing that in the negative way with my mother. And, I'm overhearing the thing as a little girl. But I just wanted to say the movement, isn't just Massachusetts and demonstrations. There are in other parts of our country, and I use it, say ours, and in this case, it was New York. But any rate, and I do think the end of the program where they said read Boston, yes, quick. It is a novel. That's what it is, but it's a historic novel, and I guess I call it the best of historic fiction where it's used for a good political purpose.
Howard Zinn wrote
Thank you, Tilly.
forward to the new edition of Boston, and he also has an essay in this book representing Sacco and Vanzetti by Marion Trashati, who has a new book about Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. And you should add all these things to the mailing list.
Okay.
The reading list. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody who has participated in tonight's event. Charlie Welch has been our tech guru back on the laptop. Sue Kranz, my sister, who joins us here recently, fresh from El Salvador, where she resides, but is here for a couple months for the birth of her grandchild. Grace Ross, who is with us tonight here, and Kevin and Nancy Devine. So good to see you, and many more online. I'd like to go over all of you, but can't do it right now. So again, thank you. If you'd like to linger, there's some liquid refreshment, some of an adult kind, back in the back. And join us. Let's see, what else is, it's not till October that we really have. We have a Peña. Peña happens every second Saturday of each month. We have a Latin American style open mic right here in this very auditorium. You can come and get on your soapbox and say whatever you want, or sing whatever song you want, or read whatever poem you want. That would be September 9th, the second Saturday, and it goes on every second Saturday. Again, Sundays in October, we have a bunch of music programs as well, programmed for some other nights of the week, and on it goes. Come to Community Church if you'd like a tour through our archives, both the Sacco and Vanzetti materials that are still left here, or our own personal church archives. We have just a rich history, 105 years of good trouble that we've been doing here in the city of Boston. Also, I'll give you one final announcement that next September, our 2.5 years in the wilderness are over when a new restaurant opens on the first floor. It's called All'Antico Vinaio, and it's an Italian chain of sandwich shops, fresh bread, with Italian prepared meats and cheeses and arugula and toppings, and it's a really nice product, and we're very proud to be featuring them here in our building. And finally, to have a tenant in our first floor. It's been a really difficult couple of years here. So thank you all so much for being with us, and we'll see you in October. Thank you, Judge Agnes, Sue Kranz, Charlie Welch.
Michelle, can you put me in touch with Matteo Marullo, who asked for the Italian translation, which is now finished? Please email me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Always an illuminating time spent with you outside the mainstream media.
Yeah, they do. Around all the no cost. No state or federal funding. And Joseph became the CEO. And now you're the Sharon. Yeah. So great folks and yeah, right. And I don't use AI, so you know, I don't know.